Good evening, you're watching World News Tonight on TVP World. I'm Aaron Darman. A persistent but manageable threat. That's how the Pentagon is describing Russia in a new defence paper as it pledges, quote, more limited support to America's allies. So what does that mean for Europe and NATO's eastern flank? Well, more in just a moment. But first, here's what's also making news tonight. Vladimir Putin launches an overnight attack on Ukraine's two largest cities, even has his own delegates talk peace in Abu Dhabi. Beyond the front line, Kyiv faces a fight for manpower and equipment. And Poland's largest charity event gears up for this year's grand finale. Washington is insisting that Europe takes the lead on its own defence, saying America will deliver less support to allies and that Russia is a manageable threat. That's according to a new Pentagon roadmap out today, again formalising Donald Trump's focus on homeland security and dominance of the Western Hemisphere, including Greenland. Sonia Agata-Besjan reports.
Washington confirms fighting the Russian threat is primarily Europe's responsibility. In its defense strategy published Friday, the U.S. said its support for the region would be more limited. All the while, America would focus on the Western Hemisphere.
We will guarantee U.S. military and commercial access to key terrain, especially the Panama Canal, Gulf of America and Greenland.
This is the Western Hemisphere, this is where we live, and we're not going to allow the Western Hemisphere to be a base of operation for adversaries, competitors and rivals of the United States.
In addition, the new strategy also looks at China, particularly amid the speed, scale and quality of Beijing's historic military buildup. As such, Washington seeks to
deter China in the Indo-Pacific through strength, not confrontation.
Analysts note the U.S. now takes a softer approach towards China compared to the 2018 strategy published during Donald Trump's first term as president. The 2026 strategy highlights engagement between Trump and China's President Xi Jinping, whereas the earlier master plan said that China wished to shape the world consistent with their authoritarian model. In the same breath, the 2018 strategy was also harsher on Russia.
China and Russia are now undermining the international order from within the system by exploiting its benefits while simultaneously undercutting its principles and rules of the road.
The difference between the two stances also lies in the fact that the U.S. went from calling out China and Russia for undermining the international order in 2018 to calling the very same international order a cloud castle abstraction in 2026. And other than on paper, the U.S. approach is also visible in practice.
This operation violates a fundamental principle of international law. It violates the UN Charter.
That is how the UN described the U.S.'s January military intervention in Venezuela, combined with the seizure of President Nicolas Maduro, whom Washington called a narco-trafficker. In the aftermath, the U.S. Defense Secretary said that
President Trump is deadly serious about reestablishing American deterrence and dominance in the Western Hemisphere.
The U.S. expands the same argument as to why it should obtain control of Greenland, the semi-autonomous territory of Denmark.
This enormous, unsecured island is actually part of North America, on the northern frontier of the Western Hemisphere. That's our territory. It is therefore a core national security interest of the United States of America.
Aside from extending influence over the Western Hemisphere, deterring China in the Indo-Pacific and increasing burden sharing with allies, Washington's new strategy also prioritizes boosting the U.S. defense industrial base.
Thank you very much. Have a great life.
For TVP World, I'm Sonia Agata-Besjan.
A barrage of Russian drones and missiles on Kyiv and Kharkiv, two of Ukraine's largest cities, has killed at least one person, injured dozens of others and left more than 1 million people without power in the subzero winter cold. As Randy Potts explains, it comes as American, Ukrainian and Russian officials wrap up trilateral peace talks in the Middle East without a breakthrough.
In the Ukrainian capital of Kyiv, the night sky was lit by explosion as a mass Russian drone attack targeted at least 3 districts late Friday. At least one person was killed, and the strikes ignited several major fires, leaving much of the capital without electricity, heat, or water as temperatures plummeted to minus 13 degrees Celsius. The onslaught extended to Kharkiv, where 11 people were injured after drones struck a maternity hospital, a medical college, and several dormitories.
Preliminary reports indicate that 25 Shaheeds struck the city of Kharkiv. 11 people who were injured are now being treated. Some of them suffered moderate injuries. We are currently working and will continue to work through the night to prevent the heating system from freezing.
Even as Russian bombs struck civilians throughout Ukraine, negotiators from the U.S., Ukraine, and Russia convened in the United Arab Emirates for their first joint meeting since the full-scale invasion began nearly 4 years ago. The American delegation, which includes Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff, described the initial talks as productive.
What we're hearing is that there are productive talks going on. And I think that's part due to Budanov, who has now taken over the office of the president from Andrei Yermak. I think it's new voices, new energy, more people who are interacting with Zelensky and giving him good advice.
The primary sticking point remains the Donbass, with Russia demanding Ukraine abandon the quarter of territory in Donbass it still controls. The U.S. is proposing a demilitarized, free economic zone for Ukraine's industrial heartland in exchange for robust security guarantees for Kyiv.
During these talks between our president and the Americans, it was once again confirmed that without resolving the territorial issue according to the formula agreed upon in Anchorage, there is no hope of achieving a long-term settlement. I highly value the understanding of the need for American monitoring and oversight of the process of ending the war and ensuring genuine security. The American side raised the issue of potential formats and formalizing the parameters for ending the war, as well as the security conditions required to achieve this.
Western allies and international financial institutions have recently pledged $500 billion over the next decade to rebuild Ukraine's infrastructure and economy. As the meeting in Abu Dhabi came to a close, U.S. officials said they plan to meet again on Sunday, January 31st. For TVP World, Randy Potts.
And let's go straight to Kyiv now, where our correspondent Oz Chatterjee is standing by in the aftermath of Russia's attacks. Good evening to you, Oz. We're hearing tonight that Ukraine's air defence ammunition stocks are running low and that the country could soon struggle to defend itself. What more can you tell us?
Well, this was something President Zelensky was quite open about last week, following another Russian missile and drone attack on Kyiv, saying that up until that previous day, Ukraine had completely run out of certain stocks, ammunition for Western-supplied air defense systems, saying that they had arrived just in time for that barrage. Now, there have been there's been more than one barrage since then. So you would wonder where the Ukrainian air defense stocks are at the moment. It's been a particularly brutal winter with Russia repeatedly targeting Ukraine's energy sector. So they have been using a lot of air defense. Early in the morning, throughout the night, there was air defense explosions and air defense machine guns firing into the air through the early hours of the morning here in Kyiv. So it's clear that these air defense systems are being used. Russia effectively using lots of drones to swamp Ukrainian territory and overwhelm Ukraine's air defense systems. So it's not an easy situation. But the big issue is more that the US is no longer supplying new amounts of aid to Ukraine, military aid. That's been suspended under the Trump administration. The only aid coming from the United States are still coming from the stocks that Joe Biden and Congress had approved. So once those stocks run out, the only kinds of assistance that Ukraine is going to be receiving is from European countries and, Canada and the United Kingdom buying weapons, NATO members buying weapons off the United States and then providing them to Ukraine. So it's not going to be easy going forward. Ukraine is already in a difficult position. Now, as it comes to the situation on the front lines, it's winter, so they haven't moved much. Over the course of 2025, Russia captured about 4,700 square kilometers of territory in Ukraine in 2025. That's about the size of Trinidad and Tobago. So not a very large amount of territory captured in a year of fighting. And as we understand from the Ukrainians, from independent intelligence assessment, from open source research, Russia has sustained incredibly heavy losses for those gains. So over the winter months, the fighting has slowed down, but we are expecting that to pick up up once the winter thaws and the spring sets in, at which point Ukraine will once again find itself facing larger-scale assaults by the Russians on multiple axes, multiple fronts, while Ukraine is still suffering from manpower shortages. So while air defense systems and missiles for them, ammunition for them, is very important to Ukraine, particularly to defend, its cities from these attacks, there is also a pressing need for other types of support for Ukraine as the fighting months are expected to start in the spring. So a difficult period ahead for Ukraine. There is a concerted push, as you've heard, diplomatically to try and achieve some kind of breakthrough here. But I think it's expected that the war will continue into 2026, and Ukraine is preparing for that with resources that I'm sure they wish they had more of, particularly from the United States.
Our correspondent in Kyiv, Oz Kataji, thank you. Moving to Poland, where the country's biggest charity fundraiser is gearing up for this season's grand finale. Over 3 decades, the Great Orchestra of Christmas charity has raised more than €500 million for children facing medical hardship, with celebrities, businesses and even politicians lending a helping hand. Anastasia Yanchenko has more.
Healthy tummies for children is the slogan for the 34th grand final of Poland's Great Orchestra of Christmas charity. This year, the fundraiser is dedicated to helping diagnose and treat gastrointestinal disease in the country's youngest patients.
We want to purchase equipment that will diagnose, treat and rehabilitate using the latest technology and treatment methods.
This weekend, Poland becomes one big charity festival. Dozens of events are already underway, with around 120,000 volunteers involved. The campaign now spans nearly 100 international clubs, and for the first time in the orchestra's history, Malta and India are taking part. The Great Orchestra of Christmas charity was founded in 1993, when doctors at the country's largest children's hospital couldn't perform heart surgeries due to lack of technology. That's when then radio employee Jerzy Owsiak took matters into his own hands, organizing a massive fundraiser. On that winter day, people across Poland donated money, jewelry and whatever they could to help sick children, a tradition that continues to this day. Over the past 33 years, the foundation has raised more than €600 million, funding almost 81,000 medical devices. Over the years, the Great Orchestra of a Christmas charity has become more than a fundraiser. For many Poles, it's true celebration of helping others.
I have been supporting this initiative for years and also participate as a volunteer.
I came to Warsaw especially for the final. I'm glad that this joint initiative brings all of us together. In this depressing world, it gives such good positive energy. I wish it could last a lifetime.
For others, it means saving someone close.
The orchestra saved my grandson's life. Little by little, everyone gives what they can, and thanks to this help, my grandson is still alive.
Entrepreneurs are also turning their business into acts of charity for the weekend. In Opole, for example, hairdressers are donating all proceeds from their services to help children.
The number of people wanting to help is rising. They're coming in for a haircut and at the same time helping save someone's life.
Politicians are also doing their part. The auction's highest bidder will win a special chance to spend some time with Prime Minister Donald Tusk in his office.
I decided to donate these golden cleats to the auction for the Great Orchestra of Christmas charity. But that's not all. The person who wins the bid for these cleats will sit down with me in this room, in this chair, where once sat Obama, Prince Charles, now King, Prime Minister Trudeau, who wasn't dating Katy Perry back then.
The initiative has touched hearts and became an indispensable part of life for many Poles. Tomorrow, Sunday, the Orchestra Charity Village in Warsaw will come alive for its final, with thousands gathering to give millions of children a chance to a healthy life. Anastasia Yanchenko, TVP World.
A rare collection of historic ceramics from as early as the 1950s have been added to the design collection of Poland's National Museum. TVP World Natalia Komarov speaks exclusively to curator Anna Maga about the acquisition.
A dream come true for any custodian. The Polish Ministry of Culture provided funds for Warsaw's National Museum to purchase a whole collection of mid-century Polish ceramics. The collection is not yet on display, but TVP World was invited to take a look behind closed doors. Anna Maga is a curator at the Gallery of Polish Design.
This year, we bought this rather complete collection of porcelain and porcelain from the 60s from Mrs. Beata Bochińska. There are 365 pieces, so you must know that what you see here is only a small portion.
Beata Bochińska, who had amassed the collection together with her husband, is a design historian by trade, but by passion.
I'm a collector, and well, there's no hiding it. My hair is gray. For 30 years, I've been collecting everyday objects from behind the Iron Curtain, mostly from Poland.
Her whole life, Beata had a particular fondness for mid-century ceramics.
In the 50s and the 60s, our everyday objects were designed by Polish artists, born and educated before the war. That means that they didn't graduate with degrees in industrial design, but in painting, sculpture, and graphic arts. They were well-trained artists. It's what differentiates Polish design from other countries.
Out of the many boxes in the vaults of the museum, the curator showed us her favorite pieces made in iconic Polish factories, many of which still operate.
Here we have an example of the scratching technique. The teapot is covered with enamel, and then intricate, decorative elements are scraped by hand and painted over. This has also been carved out by an artist. That's why the line doesn't look machine-made. It's straight, but you can see the motion of a hand trembling. And these items come from a bygone era. Ashtrays. This bridge set comes from the Karolina factory in Jaworzno. Unfortunately, we don't know the designer.
The Gallery of Polish Design is a nostalgic space. Poles recognize the fonts, the patterns, the logos, the teapots their grandmas would bring out on Christmas.
Even if these tea sets usually stayed idle in glass door cupboards, only taken out on special occasions, they were present and we remember them.
To whoever's watching in Poland or abroad, we often have these mid-modern pieces in our homes, and while for some they're just plain old cups or milk jugs, they have huge artistic value.
You heard it! Check your grandma's cupboard and you might find pieces worthy of the National Museum. And we will make sure to let you know when Beata Bochińska's impressive collection goes on display. For TVP World, Natalia Komarov.
We return now to our top stories. The Pentagon's new defence roadmap and trilateral Ukraine peace talks in the Middle East. And here to break all of this down is Daniel Hamilton, President of the Transatlantic Leadership Network. Good evening, sir.
Good evening. Good to see you.
And you. Now, the Pentagon says Russia is a, quote, persistent but manageable threat. Is Moscow manageable?
Well, the defense strategy says it's manageable for the United States, but presents a severe threat to NATO's eastern members, which includes Poland. But the thrust of the document says that European allies need to take on the bulk of deterring Russia, including taking over primary responsibility for conventional defense of Europe. That's quite a change, of course, from previous years.
I guess the question is, though, if Vladimir Putin, he's invaded another country, he's threatened to invade others, he's on many accounts been waging a hybrid war with much of Europe. Is the idea of a manageable Kremlin, even for the United States, because everything in a way impacts across the Atlantic, is that a delusion?
Well, I believe it is. I believe Putin and Russia are bent on upending the European security order. And of course, what happens to that order affects everything around the world. And as you say, Russia's a global nuclear power. It's interfering in Africa. It does lots of different things in the Middle East. So it's not just a regional power looking at Europe, but it is focused on aggression in Europe. And for 80 years, the United States has stood fast to stop that. But this document reorders the priorities for the United States. The Trump administration wants to prioritize the Western Hemisphere, homeland security, and the Indo-Pacific. And their basic message on Europe is the allies really need to take over, and that the U.S. would step back considerably from what it's been doing in the last few decades.
On President Putin, Donald Trump this week also inviting him to join this board of peace. Why do we see Mr. Trump consistently appear to give his Russian counterpart the benefit of the doubt?
Well, we can only surmise, but everything that tells us about Donald Trump is he likes strong men. He believes this is sort of a might makes right world. It seems that he divides the world into three spheres of influence, with the U.S. asserting its so-called rights over the Western Hemisphere, China in East Asia, and Russia, unfortunately, across Eurasia and in parts of Europe. And that's a very dangerous way of thinking about the world.
You mentioned the spheres of influence. Of course, this defence strategy builds on the security strategy, which was released by the Trump White House late last year, the one that warned Europe is facing civilizational collapse. Now, based on what we saw in Venezuela, this rhetoric around Greenland, the fact that, for example, also the Pentagon now slashing its role in deterring North Korea, is this another example of these spheres of influence, this desired Western Hemisphere dominance playing out in formal American foreign policy?
Well, one should not really, despite these documents, we should not overestimate that this is a coherent strategy. These documents are written, within the U.S. agencies. I'm not sure the president's even read them. He doesn't tend to do that. And he is, as you see every day, he kind of decides what the priority is at the last minute. So, and then he changes his mind. So one should not read too much into these documents. The documents also have no relationship to budgets. They're not real strategy. It has, if you're going to prioritize something, where's the money? And neither of these documents say anything about that. So it's better to look at where money is going and, the constrictions on that. And here the U.S. Congress plays a major role. They pushed back on the president's documents and asserted all sorts of limits and support for NATO allies last year in the real budget document that was passed also by the president. So, it's a constant battle. One shouldn't read too much into documents like this. One has to see what the United States is actually doing. And, on the day-to-day, the U.S. is still very engaged in Europe. It's just that it is creating a lot of anxiety among European allies, whether you can still trust the U.S. to be there if you need it.
As you rightly point out, of course, after that security roadmap was released, there was much talk about what that looks like for Ukraine, and then a couple of weeks later, Congress, then the President, of course, signing off on more cash and support for Ukraine over the coming years. That brings me to my next question, because when Washington says more limited support will be delivered to its allies, when it says Europe will take the lead against threats that are less severe for us, but more so for them, what does that mean for the eastern flank and for NATO?
Well, the president made a commitment to the president of Poland that the U.S. would not withdraw its presence in Poland. So in terms of a bilateral commitment, to the extent those commitments mean anything, I think that Poland should be secure, at least in that bilateral.
Do you trust those commitments, those words?
Well, I don't necessarily, but at least you have a commitment that other countries don't. The U.S. was going to reduce its presence in the Baltic states, and the Congress resisted that and put in more support again for the Baltic states. So you can see this tug of war going on in the U.S. The U.S. is going to reduce its troop presence, but the Congress put in a floor of 76,000 troops. There's about 80,000 at the moment. So that's not going to go down too much. without a major battle with the Congress. And the U.S. is trying to give up some of its some of the sub-commands within NATO. This is technical, but give the Europeans more of a role within NATO. I mean, Europeans have asked for more of a role within NATO, so maybe that part's not so bad. But if it's done together rather than sort of a shock treatment, surprise, that's about the trust factor. And unfortunately, the president tends to announce these things in a tweet, and everybody else scrambles to understand what he means, and then 3 days later he says, "Oh, I didn't mean it." So that unfortunately is the world we're dealing with at the moment.
And of course, when we talk about European security, we have to talk about Ukraine, and US, Ukrainian and Russian officials have met face-to-face in the Middle East for these talks over recent days. No breakthrough there. Does the fact in your mind that all three parties are sitting around the table, does that suggest progress, or is this kind of a photo op given that Russia's overnight air assaults continue?
Anytime you can get parties to sit together is a good thing, just so you're aware of, you're not undermining the realities on the ground. But there is no indication, zero, that Russia has stepped back from any of its maximal demands. In fact, in recent days, they sort of stepped it up. They are talking about not just the territorial goals that Russia has, that's been the sticking point, but they're referring to Zelensky's government as a, quote, Nazi regime, and that, of course, has to go. We're back to regime change talk here. That seemed to have gone away, but it's back now. And so every time we come up with some sort of agreement which seems to work with the Ukrainians and the Europeans, the Russians just say no. And so we're really no further along than we have been since Russia invaded Ukraine.
I do want to ask you about some reports of a 10-year plan circulating for Ukraine's recovery that includes a fast-tracked path towards EU membership, the US and the EU pushing to attract $800 billion of funds to rebuild the country. Does this show how serious the West is taking this integration of Kyiv once a deal is struck?
Well, I think it is serious. There are, of course, many problems in the details. Much of that money is a loan, probably, from the EU, since it couldn't agree to seize the Russian assets that are in European banks. So that's part of it. Whether the U.S. comes through with any additional real money is to be seen. The U.S., as you know, signed a different agreement with Ukraine, which provides for investments, but also provides for quite a bit of access for the United States and American companies. So that's a different agreement. And it's unclear in the EU side of things, can you fast track Kyiv's membership without it going through all of the hoops that previous members have had to do? The acquis communautaire, as they call it, is a huge catalog of many, many different kinds of chapters that a country has to agree to. Other countries have been in the waiting line for years trying to finish that, and suddenly Ukraine is jumping the queue. I would argue it's in the EU's interest to help Ukraine do that, but there are questions about corruption still in Ukraine. There's questions, are Ukraine really prepared for EU membership? Some are saying have Ukraine join, but not as a full member, not with veto rights on some issues. So, however it works out, I think it's time to be creative about integrating Ukraine as much as possible into the Euro-Atlantic mainstream. If NATO membership is not on the table, there's no consensus, we have to think of possibilities.
Daniel Hamilton, President of the Transatlantic Leadership Network, thank you as always for your time.
Thank you.
And that's all for World News tonight. Do stay with us here on TVP World for more. I'm Aaron Darman. Good night.